Hi, everyone. Welcome to Doc episode 22. And we're so excited today to present sugar part 3. And we've got lots of really interesting information to go over with you. This will be a follow-up to episodes 1 and 2 of the sugar series. And we've covered all sorts of information about the history of sugar and how to measure glucose and continuous glucose monitoring. Today, we'll be talking about glycemic index, glycemic load, and how to select foods to help maintain a stable blood glucose. And so I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Abbas Shafi, who will be starting out. Just a quick reminder, if you like our videos, please hit the like button and subscribe. And we'll be here roughly about once a month as we're working to have a video on different topics about preventative medicine and cancer prevention. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to Abbas.
Welcome, everybody. As Rob mentioned, for the past couple of episodes, we discussed about sugar initially from the history point of view, and then to the abundance in our lifestyle today. As we consume a large amount of sugar, there's multiple medical problem has arisen that such as obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cancers, dementia, and etc. So hopefully you have listened to those two podcasts. And in the last podcast, Rob, excellent presentation of how you can measure your blood glucose at home as well as in the laboratory and how to monitor it. So, and today we will talk about how you can choose your plate or diet. And one of the important things to know, each product or each food has its own what they call glycemic index and glycemic load. And these are somewhat controversial, not controversial, confusing, I have to say, for some of the patients and that I talk to, and a little bit more, look like more of a medical terms. So we try to today define them, make them simplify, and then we'll give some of the example, how can we choose a proper diet as well as a proper plate that you can look to choose a balanced diet so there will not be all with high content of sugar and calories. Before I do, I give it to Rob to talk about glycemic index and glycemic load.
Okay, so let's go into the glycemic index and we'll talk about what that is. So I'll go ahead and get my screen share here going, and we can talk about these different terms. So what is glycemic index? So this is an attempt to figure out for a specific food how much it will raise a person's blood sugar. So it's defined as low, medium, or high glycemic index for a certain food. And basically it goes from 0 to 100. So 100 would be something very sugary, for example, like pure sugar. So if you give a person 50 grams of sugar and study their blood glucose, that's the effect, what's called the area under the curve of that blood glucose value for the next 2 hours after that. And so that's how you get the control. And then to actually study the specific food, for example, if we're looking at, say, beets, we would give 50 grams of beets, which is quite a bit of beets. It's like 4 cups of beets, but it's about, give this beets and then study the blood glucose after eating the beets for 2 hours. And then compare the area under the curve for glucose of the beets, and then divide that by the glucose area under the curve for the pure sugar, and you get a value. And that value would be between basically 0 and 100. What's defined as low is 55 or less for the glycemic index, and then medium is 56 to 69, and then high is 70 and above. So that's the glycemic index. It's important that it really it's a standardized amount of carbohydrate of that food that's eaten. And also this is calculated based on the average of 10 individuals. So 10 individuals, glucose is studied, and then basically that's the average of those 10 individuals is how that glycemic index is calculated. So those individuals presumably are healthy, but as we know, different individuals can respond differently to different foods. And so that's something that's the idea of why 10 individuals are studied. Also, a big thing with the glycemic index is the amount of carbohydrate is standardized. And when we eat, we don't particularly eat a certain amount of carb. We're going to eat maybe a cup of beets or half a cup of beets, not 4 cups, for example. And so there is another calculation. It's called the glycemic load, which is on this. This is basically it uses the glycemic index. Basically, it's you basically have the glycemic index of a food, multiply it by the amount of the food, amount of the carbohydrates in the food that you ate, and then divide that by 100. And so you basically can get an idea of the amount of carbohydrate. So obviously, a smaller amount of beets is going to affect the blood glucose less than if you ate a larger amount, say 1 cup versus 3 cups. And so that's how the glycemic load is calculated. And so these are two different measures, but the idea is to look at the effect of blood glucose for both the food and then the portion of the food is the idea. I think it's important to say that with glycemic index, yes, lower is going to have less effect on blood glucose, but that does not mean no effect on blood glucose. So, for example, pasta, which we'll talk about a little bit here, al dente pasta might be a low glycemic index food, but if you look at your blood glucose after you eat that, the glucose rise might be 30, 40 points after eating that food. And yes, that's less than if you ate pure sugar, but it's not exactly ideal. If you're for example working on glucose intolerance or trying to really keep your glucose stable. So that's the glycemic index, the glycemic load. And please, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And I'll kick it over to Abbas to talk about some foods that we can go from there.
So in general, just any food you eat, you just need to you don't have to completely science proven what the index and the load is. It's just a sort of a guidance just to know that what you're eating and how much you're eating going to affect your blood sugar. And that's not only good for diabetes patients, it's also for if you want to lose weight, if you want to have good health maintenance there, beside other type of activities, stress, and other things. This will give you, when you go to the table, have a better choices of the food that you put on your plate, and you have to have a balanced plate, so not based on the glycemic index and load, also the fiber, protein, as well as others. So one of the things was very interesting that when you look at the different food and for example fruits, you will see the glycemic index is different from being well ripened versus when it is an early form, or just, for example, in green banana is low, a regular banana is medium, well-ripened black banana is very high. It's the same banana, but depending on when you pick it and when you eat it, that would affect your blood sugar there. So in general, if you look at the category of the vegetable, majority of the vegetable, they have a very low index, glycemic index. Then of course, then you go to if you go into the meat or those type of protein, again, those are usually, if depend how it's prepared, if they not have a lots of coating or cooked with sugar, those below. The biggest choices is, I think, is the carbohydrates and the bread and the starches that we consume, and we can go through a few of those to sort of more simplify it. But in general, just have a balance of the salads and protein and the carbohydrates is a very, very important choice. Even just simply choosing certain fruits instead of ice cream or other dessert makes tremendous difference in postprandial or post eating the blood sugar. All right, let's talk about some of the common food that is confusing. For example, let's talk about grains and starches. The most common thing that a lot of people enjoy is bread. For example, if you eat a sourdough bread, it's a very low index, glycemic index, while if you eat a white bread, is very high, and there's many of them in between. So again, you have to know how much you're eating and what you're eating. So among low grains, mixed grain, what's that, seeds grains, and sourdough. The tortilla, again, you have to see, not flour tortilla, is more of a corn or whole grain tortilla. And then to the extreme, the white bread, naan. Majority of the cereal that you choose for breakfast is most in high index. For example, a lot of people, they dieting and they think if they eat Special K, that will be a low index. But if you look at this, is our processed grains, and they have lots of taste enhancing chemical as well as sugar to make them palatable, and they're very, very high. Among other cereal, like for example, if steel cut oat, if you make it at home, and it's very, very low. But if you eat a packaged oatmeal or Cheerios, is very, very high. Among other grains, the barley, bulgur, which is very commonly consumed in Africa and Middle East, mung beans, those are all kind of low index. And as Rob mentioned, pasta and rice is, again, is depend how much you cook it. The longer you cook it, the higher the index, the faster it get absorbed. The reason is al dente pasta, because it stays in stomach. Number one, it give you more satisfaction early. And second, the breakdown, releasing from the stomach to the small intestine is much longer time. And this was actually used during World War II in Italy for poor children. They give a lot of al dente so they feel full, so they don't eat too much. And so that's sort of al dente, or the anything that you cook that is a little bit firmer, so the stomach still have to break it down with acid before completely releasing, which is if you look at jasmine rice or sticky rice, which is overcooked, or even instant white rice, they quickly get breaking down in the stomach and get quickly absorbed in the small intestine and raises the blood index. So you can look at I won't bore you with all these things, but you can look at the list to have it. We put it in our podcast, so you can look at more detail. Again, like for example, choosing sweet potato versus regular potato, so you can see that as well is a low index, depending how you cook it. But when you're making crock pot or fries or stuff like that, that makes difference between that and then the regular potato. So these are some simple choices that you can make, and that is really by the end a little index here, a little percentage there makes difference on postprandial sugar. And the fruits, apple, berries, cantaloupe, grapefruits, mangoes. Some of them were very surprising to me that they're in the low glycemic index, which are like a ripe banana or watermelon. They're very, very high. And there's many of them in the medium. And again, all of these fruits are based on how ripe they are. So the more riper they are, the higher the index. And of course, the dry fruits are moderate to high, because sometimes, for example, probably Rob going to mention more in the trail mix or other preservative dry fruits to preserve them, additional sugar or to make them to be for half shelf longer. So then consequently, not only you eating the dried figs or other type of fruits, pineapples or even mangoes. If you look at some of the packages, you see some sugar in it. That's for preservative that make it from a sort of low to very high glycemic index, and of course, depend how many of those that you have. Among the drinks, majority of the sodas, they have very high glycemic index. They're full of sugar, and whether the diabetic drinks are better or not, but they have other type of effect on the gut and the microbial in the colon. So that's by itself, in general, if you can stay away any sugary drinks, that's to be the best. When you look at the low glycemic event, for example, almond milks and cow milks, if you skim, or plain yogurts are good choices. However, if you look at oat milk or rice milk, those are very, very high in sugar. So you need to be, today there's many alternatives because of people that think they're lactose intolerance. There's many milks, which some people consider whether they are milks or not, and the market, but you have to really choose wisely what you eat, particularly when you choose yogurt. Everybody loves to eat yogurt, but when you look at the content, there's so much sugar, particularly when the percentages are low. You add carbohydrate to it or other type of flavoring into it, which is loaded with large amounts of sugar. So be smart, and the more plain, the more basic it is. And of course, the quantity, how much you eat, it makes the whole difference. In the beans or legumes, majority of these are very low glycemic. They're great substitute for protein from animals, and they're great source for fiber. So these are again how you cook them, and if you make them fresh and at home, then of course they have very low glycemic. But just to know, if you eat it can or is it processed in package, pre-packaged, this is not the same thing that what you think that you're eating, because to preserve it, they would add again sugar, they cook different things, and that can be moderate, sometimes even too high, depending on how they make things. But in general, beans are a great source of protein and healthy for you. The same thing, all the greens, they are very, very low glycemic index. And so when you fill up your plates, whether at home or in a restaurant, you choose wisely of what you put on your plate, because that's the sugar after effect on your blood is quite different based on what you put on your plate. And this is one of the other type of the effect on the blood sugar. Again, activity, stress, when you eat, how much you eat. So these are all effect. But in general, if you want to choose the proper things, hopefully this will be guidance that no, not everything is the same, particularly in fruits or cereal that everybody likes to do in the morning. That is, they're very high index. So, and when the high index you eat, your sugar quickly goes up, your insulin goes up, and in about half an hour, then again the sugar is already absorbed, and you feel hungry, then you're going to go for another snack. So So hopefully this was helpful to at least a starting point for just general knowledge and understanding of your glycemic load and glycemic index.
Thanks for that, Abbas. It was really interesting. I I was looking at potato throughout your talk, and that literally there's potato in low, medium, and high category, and that's just one example that highlights how confusing this can be. It's not straightforward. In general, the foods that are going to be lower glycemic index are going to be, as Abbas mentioned, the vegetables, particularly the non-starchy vegetables. When you get into the starchy vegetables, that's when you start getting into more glycemic, higher glycemic index foods. So, like for example, potato is going to be, or cooked mashed potato is going to be the highest. But yeah, sweet potato is going to be still lower. However, if you look at broccoli or cauliflower, non-starchy vegetables, you're going to be in the, certainly in a much lower glycemic index situation. Another good example that I like is kiwi. So there's green versus yellow. So yellow kiwis tend to be sweeter. So you could, if you were to guess that yellow kiwis have a higher glycemic index, you'd be right. So yellow kiwis tend to be have a higher impact on blood glucose. And I just wanted to mention a couple foods that that have often been considered our health foods, but you just got to be really careful. Oatmeal, Abbas mentioned, particularly instant oatmeal. Watch out. Instant oatmeal, yeah, particularly if flavored, can be extremely impactful on blood glucose. What the reason for that is because the oat has to be crushed and processed in order to be instant. Yeah, normal, if you get steel cut oats, you have to cook those for about 30 minutes in a pot. You got to boil those things. If you eat them, if you put water in and a few minutes later you eat it, it's not going to taste good because it's they're like hard as a rock. You have to cook it. Instant oatmeal, the oat has been rolled and processed and is crushed basically, and so that's why you can put the water in, mix it up, and it's good to go. However, it also has a huge impact on your when it's absorbed into processed in your small intestine. That glucose is readily available, in that carbohydrate in that oat is readily available, much easier to be released into the gut than if it had to go through the digestive process. So oat is a good example. Cereals, Special K, Cheerios, cornflakes, these are all heavily processed. So you'll see a big impact on blood glucose. And then the plant-based milks and yogurts are often sold as health foods. Our daughter loves to drink oat milk, and I drink it sometimes too. It tastes great. However, you look at the package and you look at the number. You want to look at added sugar. If you see added sugar, I think the oat milk that we have here at home right now, it has 8 grams of added sugar per cup, and it's going to have a pretty impactful rise in the blood sugar. I don't know if it's probably going to be in the high glycemic range.
And that's quickly get absorbed too. I mean, it's just the whole processing, and also with oat, that as you mentioned, that the package, they add a lot of flavor in there. They add brown sugar, they add other type of things that even make it even more higher than that. So these are so important that it sounds good. You have oatmeal for breakfast, but how you choose the same thing with, as says, potato from just your cut potato or versus mashed potato. The same with wild rice to the how your rice is processed. So these are something simple that everybody think that is good, but is very, very important to choose wisely, and not only what you're eating and how it's processed.
Yeah, I used to eat this trail mix called Mega Omega. It's actually, you look at it, it looks really healthy, and it's got all sorts of healthy type labels on it. It's vegan, and it's however, delve into it, the trail, the nuts in there are pretty good. There's no added sugar in the nuts, and nuts are definitely a low glycemic food. However, the dried fruits are coated with sugar. I think it's a preservative, and so you already have a fair, probably at least a moderate glycemic index with a lot of those like dried cranberries and whatnot. And they're actually soaked in sugar before they're packaged into the trail mix, and so it can be deceiving. Really important to look at packages, labels. I think that's really crucial. Even the package can be the label can be hard to decipher sometimes, but definitely it's get in the habit of looking at added sugar, and many foods will list that on the label.
And the labeling is also, you have to, if you look at the European labeling versus Canadian labeling and United States, and here is a lot more sort of confusing. It's not straightforward, whether it's per cup or per serving and how it is, and they try to not be honest. So the best way, I think, overall, to do nuts, beans, all green vegetables, and home cooking, because in home cooking, how much what you add to it is amazing. You go to a restaurant, and I have worked earlier many times in a restaurant. What's you eating from home, and that's why it tastes so good. Whether the shake, whether the salt, whether the taste enhancing, whether there's sugar or other type of thing they add into it. Of course, tastes good, and then with the fat and sugar and salt, that's the three basics of what's that a cook's friend. And but when you look at the whole thing, how much the total calorie, the index, and of course the load is up to a person, makes a whole difference on postprandial or after meals sugar, as well as how you felt being overall. It's not one meal or two meals, it's just the pattern and the habits. I think that's and many I have many friends that are vegan or vegetarian, and they when you let them know that this is a process or how much sugar, they themselves, they're shocked whether even a cup of yogurt, if it's not plain, how much makes a difference when they added the vanilla or the sugar and pineapple and stuff like that. So it makes a whole difference on the total calorie in one cup alone. So, and they will add up.
So that's a good example. Even plain yogurt some plain yogurts will have added sugar. It's important to look at plain unsweetened versus plain with added sugar. And
you're right.
Some brands will indicate added sugar very clearly. Some it's a little harder to decipher, but yeah. And the big one is those fruit preserves that basically it's like a jelly that's mixed in with the yogurt to add flavor, which tastes great, but it might add 10, 15 grams of carb into that just that one half cup serving of yogurt. So it can make a huge impact on the blood glucose.
And a lot of like the young people these days, I came back home, use a lot of this fruit roll-ups, a lot of these preserved fruits that is, they feel like, better. So it's fruity and it has good fiber in it, but to make them preserved, to make them that tasty, stuff like that, there's a lots of sugar because it's been cooked in sugar and concentrated and then rolled and then things. So beware what you're having, and we all have to have pleasure of eating and enjoying it, but a little bit smart on that. Choices is very important.
Just had a little flashback there to my elementary and middle school years, and probably I occasionally as adults I've enjoyed fruit roll-ups, but they're probably not the best choice. The actual fruit is probably going to be much better.
Occasionally is okay, but just know how much they're very tasty, and you just keep munching on them. So
yep.
Especially you're traveling or hiking.
Well, so that's certainly. Any other comments, Abbas? Otherwise, we can close it out.
I think we can close it up. And if you have any concern or question or any comments, please email us so we can answer you. So no, I think that will conclude our sugar series, and hopefully it has been at least some guidance, some help to our viewers and audience.
I hope everyone found this helpful, and if you like the video or the podcast, hit the like and send us your feedback. We'd really like to hear it, and we'll keep focusing on lifestyle medicine and primary prevention. So how you can basically avoid being diagnosed with a lot of these chronic illnesses, and the sugar, I think, series is a good example of how many diseases are impacted by all the sugar in the modern Western diet. So we'll look forward to seeing you again here soon on Doc to Doc. Until then, we will look forward to hearing your comments, and thanks again.
Live healthy.